You know, what if the ultimate reward for winning the Western rat race, for like doing everything society told you to do to be successful, is realizing you have to leave the West entirely just to find a family?
Yeah, that completely flips the traditional script on its head, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the assumption is usually, well, once you achieve the career and the financial stability,
Yeah.
the lasting relationship is just, the natural next step.
Exactly. But the material we are diving into today suggests that for a very specific, highly successful demographic of men, that next step feels, well, completely impossible within their own culture.
Right. It's a total roadblock.
Welcome to the deep dive, everyone. Today, we are unpacking a massive, pretty heavily debated demographic shift. We're looking at excerpts from a YouTube video by a channel called The Turning Point, and specifically an episode titled The Filipina Sanctuary.
And the central claim there is just wild.
Oh, it is. They argue that stable, high-earning Western men are not just suffering from, like, a little bit of dating app fatigue. They are experiencing a complete existential crisis, and as a result, they're entirely abandoning their local dating markets and looking east, specifically to the Philippines, to build their families.
And, before we really get into the mechanics behind this claimed exodus, we absolutely need to establish a very clear framework for you, the listener.
Yes, very important ground rules today.
Exactly. Because this source material tackles some incredibly explosive, culturally charged themes. We're talking gender roles, modern feminism, international marriage. So we are setting a strict ground rule here.
Right.
Our role today is not to endorse these claims, and we aren't here to condemn them either. We're simply your analytical guides. We're going to map the architecture of this argument and examine the logic and the sociological frameworks the source uses to build their case.
We are putting this argument under a microscope, and let me tell you, the architecture they build is intense. I mean, they are not talking about guys who are just annoyed that they got ghosted on a Tuesday.
No, not at all.
To understand the destination, we first have to understand the environment the source believes these men are fleeing. The argument hinges on this idea that the modern Western dating scene isn't just flawed, they call it a completely broken ecosystem.
And the terminology there is very deliberate, right?
Yeah.
Because an ecosystem implies this complex web of interactions that sustain life.
Right, it's foundational.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
the framework we're looking at argues that the current Western model, it can no longer sustain long-term committed relationships because it's been just entirely overtaken by hyper-individualism.
But, I mean, I want to push back on that for a second. We usually celebrate individualism in the West, don't we?
Oh, absolutely we do.
We view personal freedom and, like, self-optimization as undeniable goods. So how exactly does the source jump from personal freedom to a broken ecosystem?
Well, they connect those dots by looking at what happens to compromise.
Okay.
In a culture where the absolute highest virtue is your own personal optimization, your career, your aesthetic, your travel goals, your immediate happiness, mutual sacrifice becomes inherently threatening.
Wow. Yeah, that makes sense.
So the argument is that if two people are hyper-focused on their individual trajectories, the relationship itself just becomes secondary. It becomes a fast-paced transaction rather than a foundational covenant.
Which brings us to, honestly, the commodification of dating. The source argues that hookup culture isn't just a chaotic phase people go through in their 20s anymore. It's like the default operating system.
Yeah, it's the standard.
And when interactions are purely transactional, deep intimacy is stripped away. Like if you show vulnerability, you lose leverage. Even infidelity gets reframed, right?
Yeah, the text explicitly notes how cheating is increasingly brushed off. It's called a simple mistake or a journey of self-discovery rather than a fundamental betrayal of a shared life.
And the psychological toll of navigating that environment has to be staggering. Imagine stepping into an arena where you are looking for permanence, but the prevailing culture treats you as entirely disposable.
It's exhausting.
That actually leads to my favorite part of this entire analysis. The source uses this super vivid, brilliant metaphor to describe modern relationships in the West. They compare it to a temporary smartphone upgrade.
It's such a striking comparison.
I want to pause and really look at the mechanics of that. Think about how wild that is. We have gamified human connections so deeply that we treat emotional bonds the exact same way we treat planned obsolescence in tech.
Right, you get the newest model.
Yes, you get the new partner, the honeymoon phase is shiny and exciting, but society is basically whispering in your ear that you're probably only keeping this model for a year or two. The moment things get difficult, the moment the battery degrades, you don't sit down and repair it, you just start swiping for the newer model.
And the fatigue that generates is profound. Because the men highlighted in this analysis, they're not struggling to get dates, they're actually succeeding.
Right.
But they're succeeding in a game they've realized is completely hollow.
It is like mastering Monopoly. You know, you can accumulate all the paper money on the board, you buy all the hotels, but at the end of the day, you can't buy anything real with it.
That's a great way to put it.
But the text doesn't stop at sociological critique. They claim the exhaustion goes much deeper than just toxic dating apps. They pivot to this underlying systemic clash between culture and biology.
Yeah, and this is where the framework gets particularly rigid. They construct a very stark binary. On one side of the ledger, they place what they call Western conditioning.
Which they define as a cultural narrative demanding that women be hyper-competitive. Like, the claim is that the West conditions women to prioritize career dominance and absolute independence.
Exactly.
Family building just gets pushed to the margins, framed almost as a roadblock to true self-actualization.
Right. And on the other side of that ledger, the source places male biology.
Okay.
They assert that men possess this innate, hardwired drive to provide, to protect, and to be the anchor of a family unit. They do not view this as a flexible cultural norm at all.
So it's not something you can just unlearn.
Exactly. They view it as a biological imperative that cannot simply be conditioned away.
Yeah. I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because that feels like a massive, sweeping generalization. I mean, does this framework account for men who actually thrive in modern egalitarian partnerships?
Well, no, not really.
Like men who want a dual income, highly competitive power couple dynamic, or are they just painting entirely with an evolutionary brush?
It is an incredibly broad brush, and that's a really crucial observation. Their analysis largely dismisses the egalitarian ideal as unworkable for the specific demographic they are studying. The logic points to a catastrophic collision. If a man is biologically wired to provide, but he is partnered with someone culturally conditioned to view his provision as patronizing or his desire to protect as controlling, well, his intrinsic purpose is hollowed out.
Wow.
The culture is basically telling him that his core biological function is obsolete.
That disconnect breeds deep resentment. And the source leans into some very heavy dramatic imagery to explain how this resentment manifests. They talk about the ghost that haunts every Western man, and that ghost is divorce.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to just skim over that word. A ghost implies this invisible, paralyzing terror that dictates your behavior even when the room is empty. I assume they aren't just talking about the emotional heartbreak of a breakup here.
No, it's much more structural than that.
Right, they are digging into the actual mechanics of the legal system, aren't they?
They absolutely are. The source shifts from biology straight into family law. They argue that this fear is highly rational because Western family courts are fundamentally biased against high-earning men. Well, the claim is that a man can do everything society asks of him. Build the wealth, maintain the home, commit to the partnership, and he can still be stripped of his assets, his property, and his access to his children through no fault of his own.
Just because the partner wanted an exit?
Exactly.
Think about the mechanics of that from a risk assessment perspective for a second. It is like being asked to sign a business contract where if the partnership dissolves for literally any reason whatsoever, one partner automatically receives 50% of the capital, the primary operating headquarters, and exclusive control over the subsidiary projects.
That is exactly how they frame it.
No sane entrepreneur would ever sign that contract.
And that's precisely the conclusion the source draws. Because of these legal structures, Western marriage no longer functions as a safe haven for these men. It's transformed into what the video explicitly calls a rigged battleground.
A rigged battleground.
The risk-to-reward ratio is completely inverted.
If you look at the terrain and realize the mines are stacked against you, you don't keep marching forward. You pivot. Which brings us to the massive question at the center of this analysis. If the West is a rigged battleground, where exactly are these men seeking refuge? What does that look like?
Well, this brings us to the video's proposed solution, which they call the Filipina sanctuary.
The word choice is fascinating there. Sanctuary. I mean, it is the absolute antithesis of a battleground. It implies safety, asylum, a place where the rules of engagement are totally different.
The rules are entirely different. The analysis describes this Eastern ideal as operating on a fundamentally different cultural axis.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Where the West is defined by individualism, the sanctuary is defined by deep, multi-generational family integration. Marriage isn't just a contract between two free agents. It's the merging of two distinct lineages.
Wow.
Furthermore, the source emphasizes a profound respect for faith, which provides a shared, unbreakable moral framework that acts as a buffer against the disposability we discussed earlier.
So it really is an entirely different operating system. The mechanics of daily life just change completely.
Yes. Instead of the endless, exhausting competition of the Western market, the text asserts that a Filipina partner brings a culture of unshakable devotion and warmth.
Unshakable devotion.
Exactly. The critical distinction here is the framing of the relationship. She treats her partner not as an equal competitor to be continuously measured against, but as a co-conspirator, a fellow family builder.
Let's look at the side-by-side contrast the video is constructing because the imagery is incredibly stark. In the West, the argument suggests the man is locked in a transactional state, forced to wear defensive armor every single day.
Yeah, in his own home.
Think about what that actually means on a daily basis. Living your romantic life braced for impact. You are mentally checking legal precedents, you're worried about asset division, you're constantly wondering if your partner is currently browsing for a smartphone upgrade.
It's a state of pure exhaustion.
That level of hypervigilance is just paralyzing.
And the psychological relief promised by the Eastern ideal is the exact opposite of that vigilance. The framework suggests that in this sanctuary, that heavy armor can finally drop. The man steps into the environment, and the war is just over.
He gets to exhale.
He exhales, and he steps into the role of a secure provider. He no longer has to apologize for his desire to lead, to protect, or to anchor the family.
Right.
According to the source, his natural inclinations are met with genuine feminine energy, which validates his biological imperative rather than demonizing it. He shifts from being a disposable competitor to an irreplaceable protector.
Okay, I am tracking the logic of the source material here. We've mapped the broken ecosystem, the biological and legal traps, and the promise of the sanctuary. But let's ground this in reality for a second.
Sure.
A man doesn't just wake up on a random Thursday, stare at his coffee maker, and decide to uproot his entire existence, move across the globe, and marry into a totally different culture.
No, absolutely not.
That kind of tectonic shift requires incredible momentum. How does the source explain the actual mechanism of change? How does this massive shift happen?
It's a phenomenal question, and the video doesn't treat this as an impulsive leap at all. They outline a very methodical progression. They describe a decision matrix with 3 distinct psychological breaking points that systematically dismantle a man's attachment to the West and push him toward the East.
Okay, so there has to be a catalyst. A guy doesn't abandon his entire social network on a whim. What's the first domino to fall?
The framework points to a moment of profound existential dread, which they call the legacy realization.
The legacy realization.
Right. Picture a highly successful man sitting in his luxury apartment, looking at the wealth and stability he's built. He looks out at the fast-paced, transactional dating culture around him, and he has a sudden, terrifying epiphany. His lineage is going to stop with him.
Oh, wow. He realizes he has spent decades building an empire for an audience of one.
Exactly. The wealth has nowhere to go. The realization sets in that he desperately craves a lasting family legacy. But the crucial part of this turning point is the conclusion he draws from it.
What's that?
He realizes that to build a resilient family, he requires a partner who genuinely elevates motherhood and family above hyper-individualism. He concludes he simply cannot build a legacy with someone culturally conditioned to view a family as a burden to their personal freedom.
So recognizing that his legacy is dying gives him the motive. But motive isn't enough to cross an ocean. He still has to navigate the logistics of getting married without losing his empire.
Right.
How does he bridge the gap from wanting a legacy to actually executing this international shift?
That bridges directly into the second mechanism in the matrix, the risk versus peace calculation.
Risk versus peace. Let's just look at the stark binary weight of those 2 specific words. We aren't talking about passion versus romance or excitement versus boredom here.
No, not at all.
We are talking about risk management versus psychological peace.
It is framed almost entirely as a mathematical, calculated decision.
Right.
The man takes the legacy he wants to build, and he runs it through the reality of the family courts we discussed earlier. He looks at the biased legal structures, the looming threat of catastrophic asset division, and he makes a logical choice.
He opts out.
Exactly. He simply refuses to risk his financial future and his sanity in Western jurisdictions.
This is such a fascinating pivot in their argument. They are framing this international exodus not as some starry-eyed romantic quest for a soulmate. It is an active, aggressive risk mitigation strategy.
It really is.
By choosing a culture that treats marriage as a sacred, unbreakable covenant, he's essentially removing the systemic risk of the Western court system. Like, devotion simply outweighs endless competition because devotion is structurally safer.
That encapsulates their argument perfectly. The systemic risk is removed. But there is still one final push required to turn this logical calculation into an actual plane ticket.
Okay, what is it?
The video calls this the devotion deficit.
The devotion deficit. So we move from the existential to the logical to the emotional famine.
Famine is the perfect word for it.
Yeah.
This is described as the absolute breaking point. It's the moment this man looks in the mirror and admits a very hard truth.
Reaches.
Despite the impressive career, the cars, the status, the bank account, he is starving. He is starving for true emotional intimacy, for validation, and for genuine, unironic appreciation.
He realizes that coming home to a high-rise full of expensive furniture means absolutely nothing if the person sitting across from him views him as a temporary asset.
Precisely. It is the realization that a partner who offers unwavering devotion and warmth is infinitely more valuable than a lifetime of navigating endless, exhausting competition.
The armor just simply becomes too heavy to carry for one more day.
Exactly.
Wow, okay. We have unpacked a tremendous amount of incredibly heavy, highly debated source material today.
Yeah.
We have looked at the complete architecture of this argument.
Yeah, and if we synthesize the massive global shift outlined by the turning point, it maps a very deliberate journey.
Right.
It begins with the utter systemic exhaustion generated by the Western dating ecosystem, a landscape defined by hyper-individualism, biological friction, and the legally enforced threat of divorce. And it culminates in the highly calculated pursuit of an Eastern sanctuary, where men actively seek to trade their defensive armor for traditional devotion and lasting peace.
And here's where we bring it back to you. Whether you find the source's claims profoundly accurate or whether you fiercely disagree with their biological and sociological frameworks, we have to acknowledge that this material taps into a universal human tension.
It definitely does.
It forces us to examine how the cultural and legal systems we live inside directly impact our most intimate, fundamental needs for connection and legacy. We all want to be seen. We all want some form of legacy.
Right.
And the environment we are immersed in absolutely dictates how safe we feel pursuing those desires.
Systems design behavior. The underlying argument of the source is that the current Western system is perfectly designed to produce isolation.
Which brings me right back to that one sticky phrase that I haven't been able to shake since we started prepping for this deep dive. The temporary smartphone upgrade.
It's so evocative.
Even if you don't share the source's views on gender dynamics or international marriage, consider that metaphor. In a world increasingly built on endless, hyper-individualistic scrolling, where interactions are increasingly viewed as disposable commodities, what is the ultimate personal cost to treating human connection like a commodity?
It's a huge cost.
The video ends by asking its audience, what is your turning point? But I want to leave you with a slightly different question to mull over. If you look closely at the environments you navigate every day and the defensive armor you have been forced to put on, what radical steps might you have to take to finally drop that armor and find your own version of true peace?